Sometimes the world mocks what it doesn't understand. For a single father named Mark, bringing his lunch in a plastic grocery bag became the reason people laughed behind his back. But one night, the Hell's Angels, men with a fearsome reputation, showed up at his door. What they did next shocked everyone. Before we start into today's story, let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? And if our stories touch your heart, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us reach our first 1,000 subscribers and bring you more inspiring stories every week. Mark sat alone in the break room, the hum of vending machines filling the silence. He unknotted a crumpled plastic grocery bag, pulling out a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, an apple, and a half-empty thermos. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get him through the long factory shift. Across the room, two younger co-workers smirked. "Nice lunch bag, man." One of them sneered. "Couldn't spring for Tupperware?" The other laughed, adding, "Guess that's what happens when you shop in the clearance aisle." Mark kept his eyes on the sandwich, pretending he didn't hear. But every word cut. They didn't know the truth, that every extra dollar went to his daughter's school shoes, her violin lessons, keeping the lights on. The plastic bag wasn't laziness. It was survival. But the mocking continued day after day. Every time he reached for that crinkled bag, he felt smaller. And yet, what Mark didn't know was that his quiet humiliation was about to be witnessed by someone who would change everything. Someone who carried both scars and loyalty stitched into his leather vest. Mark wasn't a man who complained. After his wife passed 3 years ago, he had learned to swallow grief and carry on. His daughter, Lily, was only 6 when cancer took her mother. Now 9. She was the reason Mark woke up at dawn every day. He worked double shifts at the local steel plant, came home exhausted, then helped Lily with homework before collapsing on the couch. He didn't have fine things. Their kitchen cabinets were mostly bare by the end of the week. But somehow Lily always had what she needed. Every penny stretched thin. Tupperware had cracked months ago, and he hadn't replaced it. Instead, the grocery bags that piled up from discount store runs became his makeshift lunch containers. He didn't mind. He'd endure hunger, humiliation, exhaustion, as long as Lily smiled. But the whispers at work dug into his chest. They weren't just mocking a bag. They were mocking his effort, his fatherhood. Still, Mark endured silently, until one day, someone else decided his silence had lasted long enough. Started as snickers, but soon turned crueler. One afternoon, Mark walked into the break room to find his plastic bag tied in knots, his sandwich crushed flat. A sticky note stuck to it read, "Feed the poor fund." The laughter from the corner table stung worse than the stale bread he forced down his throat. His hands trembled, not from rage, but from humiliation. He wanted to fight back, but every ounce of his energy went into holding his life together for Lily. That night, when she asked why he wasn't hungry, he lied. "Already ate at work, sweetheart." He tucked her in, kissed her forehead, then sat alone in the dark kitchen, staring at the empty shelves. The next day, it happened again. This time, one of the men lifted the bag in front of everyone. "Hey, check it out, the single dad special. Classy, right?" The room erupted in laughter. Mark's face burned. He gripped the table so hard his knuckles went white. And just when he thought he couldn't endure another day, a sound cut through the room. The deep growl of motorcycles pulling up outside. The roar of engines rattled the break room windows. Conversations stopped. Everyone turned as shadows crossed the parking lot. 5 motorcycles pulled in, chrome gleaming beneath leather-clad riders. Their vests bore patches people rarely spoke of aloud. AFFA, Angel Forever, Forever Angel. The Hell's Angels. Workers pressed against the glass, whispering nervously. "What are they doing here?" The factory foreman rushed out, barking orders for everyone to stay inside. But Mark stayed rooted, his half-crushed lunch bag trembling in his hand. The riders dismounted in perfect unison, boots heavy against the pavement. At their center was a man with a scar along his jaw, his eyes sharp and unflinching. He scanned the building like he was looking for someone, and then he walked straight inside. The break room went silent as the door creaked open. The air grew heavy. Every mocking coworker suddenly shrank back. The man's gaze swept the room, then landed on Mark. "Which one of you's Mark Turner?" Mark's throat closed. His hands shook as he slowly raised them. I am." The biker nodded once. "Come with me." The factory yard felt colder with all eyes watching through the windows. Mark followed the scar-jawed biker, heart pounding like a war drum. The other angels stood in formation, silent, their faces unreadable. The leader stopped by his bike, turned, and studied Mark for a long moment. Then he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a crumpled plastic grocery bag. Mark's eyes widened. "You think this bag makes you less of a man?" the biker asked, his voice gravel and steel. Mark stammered. It's just all I've got." The biker's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "Good. Then you're already richer than most men here. You're feeding your kid. That's what matters." Mark swallowed hard. "How do you know about my kid?" The man's gaze darkened. "Because someone who loves you told us. And because no child of a good father should go hungry in this town." The angels exchanged looks, then began unloading boxes from their bikes. Food, canned goods, fresh fruit, even toys. Workers inside the factory pressed against the glass in stunned silence. Mark's humiliation had just turned into something no one expected. Mark stood frozen as the angels stacked boxes at his feet. Bread, milk, cereal, even a new backpack for Lily. The scar-jawed leader pulled out an envelope and handed it to him. Inside was cash, more than Mark had seen in months. "This isn't charity," the biker said. "It's respect. We take care of our own. And you, Mark, you're one of us now." Mark's throat tightened. "I don't understand." The man pointed toward the breakroom windows, where faces pressed against the glass. "They laugh because they don't know real weight. Feeding your child on empty cupboards? That's strength they'll never touch." Mark swallowed tears. For years, he'd felt invisible, carrying his pain alone. But now, these strangers, their reputation feared by all, stood before him with honor. The foreman stepped outside nervously. "What's going on here?" The biker's gaze snapped toward him. "We're giving a father back his dignity. Something you should have done long ago." Silence swallowed the yard. Respect was no longer optional. As workers whispered behind the glass, the biker leaned closer to Mark. "Name's Cole. I knew your brother." Mark's eyes widened. "Daniel?" Cole nodded. "We served time together years ago. He spoke about you every chance he got. Said you'd raise a family stronger than the both of us. When word reached me you were struggling, I couldn't ignore it." Mark's chest tightened. Daniel had died years earlier, his troubled past rarely spoken of. Hearing his name now was like hearing a ghost. Cole placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Your brother saved me once. Now I pay it forward." Mark's lip trembled. No one at work knew this history. To them, he was just the quiet widower with the plastic bag. But to these bikers, he was blood by bond. Inside, the bullies shifted uncomfortably, realizing the man they mocked carried ties far deeper than they imagined. Mark whispered, "Thank you." Cole shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. There's still something to settle." Cole pushed open the breakroom door with force, Mark trailing behind. The factory fell silent, the mocking co-workers suddenly paling under the weight of leather vests filling the doorway. Cole's voice cut the air like a blade. "Which one of you thought it was funny to humiliate a father feeding his child?" No one answered. The men who had once laughed the loudest suddenly stared at the floor. Cole's boots thundered across the tile as he stopped in front of the ringleader. Travis, a cocky 20-something with slick hair and a smirk that now trembled. "You?" Cole growled. Travis swallowed hard. "It was just a joke." Cole slammed a fist against the vending machine, rattling it. The entire room flinched. There's nothing funny about starving kids. Mark stood behind him, jacket still clutched in his hand. He didn't want violence, but for once he wasn't invisible. His humiliation had witnesses and defenders. The air buzzed with tension, every heartbeat waiting for the next move. Travis muttered, "We didn't know he was struggling." Cole's eyes narrowed. "You didn't need to know. You respect a man working for his family. Always." The other workers shifted uneasily. Some nodded in agreement, others avoided eye contact. The truth was undeniable. Mark had endured more strength in silence than most could handle in comfort. Mark finally spoke, his voice shaking but clear. "I never wanted pity. I just wanted to be left alone to do my job." He turned toward the bullies. "But you turned my effort into a punchline. You don't know what it costs to hold everything together for a child." The break room grew quiet. Even Travis had no reply. Cole crossed his arms. "Here's the deal. You can keep mocking, or you can learn something from a man twice the father you'll ever be. Choice is yours." The silence that followed wasn't fear alone. It was shame. For the first time, the bullies shrank under the weight of their own cruelty. That night, word spread quickly through the town. Workers who once laughed at Mark now whispered about the scene. The roar of engines, the leather-clad angels standing guard, the bullies silenced. But the real turning point happened in Mark's kitchen. Cole and the others carried in the boxes they'd brought. Bread filled the counters, fresh vegetables lined the shelves, and Lily squealed with delight as she unpacked cereal boxes and fruit cups. Her eyes sparkled. "Daddy, where did all this come from?" Mark knelt beside her, voice breaking. "From friends." Cole watched quietly, arms crossed, a faint smile tugging at the edge of his scarred jaw. He had seen men fall to pieces in prison yards and battlefields. But here, in this little kitchen filled with laughter, he saw strength that humbled even him. Mark wiped his eyes, overwhelmed. For years he had carried his shame alone. But now, surrounded by food, love, and unexpected brotherhood, he felt something return, his dignity. And dignity, once restored, is harder to take away than anything else. The next morning, Mark walked into work with the same plastic bag in his hand. But the room didn't fill with laughter this time. Whispers rippled through the factory floor. Stories of the angels unloading food, of Cole silencing the bullies with a single glance. Travis avoided his eyes completely. The smirk he once wore had vanished, replaced with shame he couldn't shake. Even the foreman, usually quick to criticize, muttered a stiff mourning Turner. For the first time in months, Mark didn't feel small. He still carried the same bag, but it no longer weighed him down. At lunch, when he unknotted the plastic and pulled out his sandwich, silence filled the break room. Not a silence of mockery, but of respect. Some looked away, others simply nodded. It was subtle, unspoken, but powerful. Mark realized something. Dignity isn't in the container that holds your food. It's in the hands that earn it, and in the love that waits for you at home. That evening, Cole stopped by again. Lily greeted him at the door with a drawing, her and her dad standing beside motorcycles under a bright sun. She had even scrawled Mr. Cole above one of the figures. Cole chuckled, kneeling to thank her. But when she ran off, his expression turned serious. "You know why we showed up, Mark?" Mark nodded. "Because of Daniel." Cole shook his head. "Not just Daniel. Because every father matters. People think the angels are only about power and fear. But real power is loyalty. Standing up for those who carry weight the world ignores." Mark listened, the words sinking deep. For years, he had believed strength meant silence. But Cole was teaching him something different. Strength also meant allowing others to stand with you. "You've been walking alone too long," Cole said, gripping his shoulder. "That ends now." For the first time in years, Mark felt not just defended, but truly seen. The factory couldn't escape the shift. Days later, Travis and his crew cornered Mark in the yard. Not with laughter, but with unease written across their faces. "Look," Travis muttered, eyes darting nervously. We didn't know about your kid." Mark stood taller than he ever had before. "You didn't need to know. Respect shouldn't depend on details." The others shifted uncomfortably. The balance of power had changed. They weren't mocking anymore, they were apologizing. One of them shoved his hands into his pockets. "We're sorry, man. Won't happen again." Mark studied their faces, seeing fear but also shame. For once, he wasn't trembling. He wasn't small. He was the one holding their gaze steady. "You'll answer to me or to them," Mark said, glancing toward the road where the distant echo of engines could still be heard some nights. The message was clear. He wasn't alone anymore. And even bullies understood the weight of brotherhood. Weeks passed, and Mark's kitchen transformed. Once bare, its shelves now overflowed, not with endless abundance, but with enough to silence the echo of emptiness. Lily's laughter filled the air as she helped pack her own lunches. She no longer noticed the bag her father carried. To her, it wasn't embarrassing. It was proof of love. One evening, Cole brought over his crew. They crowded into the small kitchen, tattoos and leather vests strangely out of place among checkered curtains and family photos. But when Lily passed out cups of juice, even the hardest men softened. They ate, they laughed, and for a moment, grief and hardship lifted. Mark realized something powerful. This wasn't just charity. It was kinship, a chosen family built not on wealth, but on loyalty. He looked around the crowded room, and for the first time since his wife's passing, he felt something like peace. This was what survival could look like together. 1 month later, a new worker joined the factory. During lunch, he pulled out his meal, wrapped in a plastic bag just like Mark's. The room stirred. Mark noticed the flicker of shame in the young man's eyes. He remembered it all too well. But before anyone could laugh, Mark stood up. He walked over, sat beside the worker, and pulled his own plastic bag from under the table. "Best way to keep food fresh," he said with a smile. The room stayed silent, no one daring to mock. Some even nodded quietly, as if acknowledging the shift. The bullies? They kept their heads down. They had learned the cost of cruelty. For the first time, the break room wasn't divided between laughter and silence. It was united in quiet respect for the man who had endured humiliation and risen above it. Mark realized something. He no longer carried just food in that bag. He carried a story of dignity reclaimed. Mark sat alone one night, staring at the worn kitchen table. Lily was asleep upstairs, the house finally quiet. His hands trembled as he unfolded the plastic bag he had carried for months. For the first time, he didn't see shame in its wrinkles, he saw survival. Cole's words echoed. "Respect a man feeding his child. Always." The silence pressed heavy, but it no longer crushed him. Instead, it felt like a reminder. His wife would have been proud of every small choice, every humble effort. She would have told him dignity was never in appearances. Mark pressed the bag flat, smoothing it carefully. It wasn't just a container. It was a symbol of how far he had carried Lily, through storms no one else could see. Outside, the distant rumble of motorcycles carried through the night. Not loud, not threatening, just steady, like a heartbeat reminding him he wasn't alone anymore. The silence broke, not with despair, but with gratitude. The next weekend, Lily asked if they could go to the park. Mark packed sandwiches, apples, and juice into a plastic bag. When they arrived, families spread out on picnic blankets, coolers, and baskets beside them. Lily didn't care. She ran through the grass, ponytail bouncing, laughter ringing like bells. Mark sat on a bench, the bag at his side, and watched her. For the first time, he felt no sting of comparison. A mother nearby smiled kindly. "Simple but sweet," she said, nodding toward his bag. Mark smiled back. Simple is enough. When Lily ran back and pulled her sandwich out, she beamed. Best lunch ever, Daddy. Mark's heart swelled. Pride, not shame, filled his chest. He finally understood dignity wasn't about what others saw. It was about love given without apology. And in that moment, surrounded by families who would never know his battles, Mark felt like the richest man alive. Late one evening, Cole stopped by once more. His motorcycle growled softly before going silent at the curb. He stepped inside, glancing at Lily's drawings taped proudly to the fridge. She's growing strong, Cole said with a faint smile. Mark nodded. Because of you. Because of all of you. Cole shook his head. Because of you, Mark. We just reminded you who you are. They sat in the quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Mark finally asked the question that lingered. Why me? Why so much? Cole leaned back, eyes steady. Because the world needs reminders that fathers matter, that dignity matters. We don't ride just for ourselves. We ride for those who carry unseen weight. Mark's eyes burned with tears. For years, he thought his struggle invisible. But here was proof it had been seen, honored, lifted. That night, when Cole left, Mark didn't just feel defended. He felt chosen. Months passed, and the story of the lunch bag became legend in the factory. No one mocked again. Workers began nodding respectfully when Mark passed. Some even brought their own meals in plastic bags, no longer ashamed. One day, Lily asked, Daddy, why don't you buy a lunchbox? Mark chuckled, brushing her hair from her eyes. Because this bag reminds me of what we've survived, and who stood with us when it mattered. She smiled, not fully understanding, but sensing something important. Mark folded the bag neatly and set it on the counter. It wasn't trash, it was testimony. Proof that dignity doesn't come from wealth or appearance, but from persistence and love. He thought of Cole, of the angels, of the night his kitchen overflowed with food and laughter. That memory would never fade. In time, people might forget the details, but Mark would always remember. His humiliation became his redemption. And it all started with a plastic bag. On a bright spring morning, Mark and Lily walked hand in hand to the park. He carried the familiar plastic bag, worn but strong. Families gathered around, but this time, there was no shame, only quiet pride. He sat on the grass, pulled out sandwiches and handed one to Lily. She grinned, sunlight catching her face. You're the best, Daddy. Mark looked at her, heart swelling. I try, sweetheart. I really try. Somewhere in the distance, the faint echo of motorcycles rolled like thunder over the hills. Mark smiled, knowing he would never walk this road alone again. The bag rustled in his hands, not as a reminder of poverty, but of strength, of love that endured mockery, of brotherhood that rose from nowhere, of dignity reclaimed. And in that moment, Mark understood. The world had tried to shame him, but the truth had made him stronger. Love had filled his kitchen, and dignity had filled his heart. Sometimes the smallest things carry the deepest truths. For Mark, a plastic bag became proof of resilience, love, and unexpected brotherhood. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe, like, and press the bell icon. More stories await. Ordinary lives with extraordinary courage.